The next thing that we should touch on today is thermometers. There are so many different kinds now. There are digital
Right.
thermometers, there are infrared. I don't think there's any mercury ones anymore, but I'll let you tell us a little bit about thermometers, Jane.
Right. Well, thank you, Kathy. As you said, there are a lot of different types of monitors, ways to monitor the temperature. In the old days, we did use a mercury thermometer, but I think the mercury pretty much has been outlawed these days because it is a pretty harsh chemical. So one of the most common ones these days are this digital thermometer. And remember that the body in general has a temperature. It's not that you have a fever, but your body has a certain temperature. And the normal body temperature is about 98.6. And that again is kind of like saying, well, the normal blood pressure is 120/80, but 98.6 is pretty much the accepted one. Now, the range in general is about 97 to 99 is generally considered about normal body temperature. So keep in mind that the body wants to be in homeostasis, and that means that it wants its blood pressure, it wants its heart rate, it wants its temperature, it wants everything to keep on working very nicely so that the cells of the body can work well. And if the temperature in the body goes up, that's called a fever. If the temperature of the body goes down too low, that's called hypothermia. So the body wants to stay at a nice warm level. And so one of the ways that we can check it, obviously, is to use a thermometer. Now, this thermometer, it does go under the tongue. Now, there are different ways to measure the temperature. You can do it on the forehead. You can do it under the tongue. You can do it under the arm. That's called the axillary temp. And you can do it rectally. So the doctor will let you know which one he would prefer. The most accurate temperature is a rectal temp, but not everybody's going to go around doing a rectal temperature, and you don't need to. But anyway, with the thermometer, and one thing to remember, if you're going to use one of these digital thermometers that go in your mouth, that you don't want to have had some ice or some drink that's kind of chilled, and you don't want to have had something that's hot either. So give your mouth time to come back to normal within about 30 minutes of drinking something hot or cold before you try to take the temperature. The temperature can vary during the day. Generally, it's lower in the mornings and it goes up in the evenings. And if anybody that's ever been sick knows, well, I always feel worse in the evening. Well, that's your normal body temperature is a little higher in the evening. So if you've got an illness, that temperature is going to be even higher at nighttime. So these types, they have a little button on them that you press. And after you press that button, that turns the machine, the little device on, and you'll see numbers on there. Then you just stick it under your tongue. Now, most of these digital thermometers make a sound when they've reached their top level. Now, I need to get a new one because mine doesn't make a very loud sound, and it's hard to see the number on here. If you can't hear the sound, it's hard to see it if you've got it in your own mouth. But just remember that you're probably going to have to hold it under there at least close to 3 minutes, sometimes 2 to 3 minutes. It just depends on be sure and read the instructions from your device. Another way that you can check it is to use one of these handheld temperature scanners. And I think since COVID, we've all become pretty familiar with these. Every time I walk into the hospital when I go to work, your forehead is scanned. Every time you go anywhere. I went to a concert last night at a church, and our temperature was scanned. So I think these are pretty common that people are familiar with in these days. They're not very expensive. And again, you want to read the directions on the package of it. Now, this particular one, the temperature will read all the way down to about 86 degrees up to about 109 degrees. Now, not that you would ever want your temperature to be 86 or 109, but they do have a pretty good range. So you just turn it on and point it toward the forehead, and it will read off the temperature. And mine says 97.7, which is within the normal range. Now, some people have asked, can I use this on my wrist also? And so I checked mine on the wrist, which I'll do again. And if I wanted to put it up, I would check it on the wrist. And mine checks at 95.5 on my wrist right now. And I think the reason for that most likely is that the temperature in where I'm sitting, there's some cool air coming up, and it may be, going on my wrist. So I don't think it's not quite as accurate if you check it on your wrist as it is on your forehead. Another thing is to make sure your forehead is as dry as possible. And if you have a lot of hair, you would push it out of the way. If you have a hat, that's far down, take that hat off and make sure that you get a good reading on the head.
Well, that sounds like all of the information that most of us are familiar with, but there are a few questions that I have for you,
okay,
of course.
Good.
98.6 is kind of what we know as the normal. Just like you said, you might think there's a normal blood pressure, but people can vary in their body temperatures,
yes.
right? And and if my body temperature, which I happen to know from an unfortunate extended stay in the hospital when I was first diagnosed, they took it every day, multiple times a day, and it was almost always 96.8. So that's what my normal is, correct?
That's right. And that's an important thing for you and the doctor to establish, because if he says, well, I don't need to know unless your temperature is 101, well, for you, your temp may be really high if it's 101, so the doctor would need to give you that parameter. And, in general, it's about 97 to 99 is kind of that range. But if yours is 96.8, that's a good thing to know, because obviously it would be a red flag to you if all of a sudden, you started feeling a little bad and your temperature was 99. That would be, more significant than if my temperature was 99.
And it's just, again, just like everything else that we've said today, it's a matter of what your, like if you chart it, what your temperature is. If you go into the doctor's office and it's the same thing all the time and has been for years, what it is. And it's okay to be your own best advocate in that position. And my doctor did say, if your temperature is 99 or 100, I need to know.
Right.
That might not be as big of a deal for somebody else, but it would have been for me. I also know that I in my business life run a fitness facility, and in our state, our guidelines were we have one of those thermometers mounted on the wall, and everybody puts their forehead up to it as they come in. And if anybody reads 100.4 or higher, we're supposed to turn them away. But I know with kids, because we have kids in our facility too, we were also told have them sit down for a little while because they might have gotten all worked up in the car on the way over. Any guidance on that as far as taking temperature?
Well, I think like in your business practice, I think definitely, I think that's something that maybe to have a chair there, or to have some place that you could sit, you could stand and just relax for a few minutes, because any kind of real physical activity, or if the kid's gotten really wet, warmed up in the car or whacked out and having to fight with their sibling that's sitting by them, that can increase the body temperature. So I think it's a good thing to maybe have kids relax a little bit before they do the scanning.
So, and then in general, because we now know from learning from you that blood pressure, you need to have your feet on the floor, your arms uncrossed, your legs uncrossed, your back supported. Is there stuff like that for temperature as well?
Well, I think to try not to take it right after you've exercised, because that can increase the temperature. So I think the main thing to remember is that if your doctor's asking you to monitor your temperature, he's probably going to ask you to take it a couple of times a day, so that you have a morning reading and an evening reading. Um, because those, the variance during the day is a true variance. And plus your activity level can change how, if the skin is hotter than normal. If you've just come in from outside, or I had a friend tell me she goes to dialysis, and since COVID has been happening, of course, they have to check their temperature every time that they go into the dialysis center. And she said one day she stood outside of the dialysis center while her husband goes to dialysis also, which is a bad thing to have both of them on dialysis. But she was standing outside the dialysis center waiting to go in. And when she went in, they swanned her, and her temperature was like 100. And they said, oh, we may not be able to, we're going to have to check that again. We may not be able to do you today. And she said, I tell you what, I was standing in the sun waiting on my husband to come in. Let me relax a little bit and then check it. And they did do that for her. And it went down to within the normal limit.
So just like everything else, there can be parameters that change things. Heat and cold. You said not to drink anything hot or cold before you take the temperature. So I guess just like everything else we do, taking a few during the day might help you, understand your own temperature.
Right, exactly. And get what your baseline is. And then you would be able to let the doctor know if that's one of the things he's asking you to look for, is what is your temperature. Then you would be able to let him know, hey, this is a deviation from my baseline. And can I say one more quick thing, Kathy, before we go into our wrap up? And I was going to mention this while we were talking about blood pressure, but I think it may be a good time to talk about this in general, because we've gone over some of the different devices that we can use at home. And we're doing this webinar for the Vasculitis Foundation. And, I think so many times those of us that are dealing with patients that have vasculitis, or that have vasculitis ourselves, can attribute anything that's out of the normal to being because of my vasculitis. And I think we need to also remember that your body can have other things go wrong, and that not everything is vasculitis. That doesn't mean you don't tell your doctor about it, but it doesn't mean that you have to say, oh, I'm having a terrible flare, or I'm just not going to worry about this because it's my vasculitis, So I think you have to be smart about it. And my husband, we had that experience with him because he did have 2 renal flares when in his early days of having vasculitis. And then he had a pulmonary flare, and then he just had general, not real flares, but just not under great control either, and was on medication for many years. And so, later, and his creatinine and his glomerular filtration rate had stabilized. And so I was used to looking at a certain number on those results. And I noticed that his numbers were creeping back up, and I was concerned about that. And, the doctor would say, the rheumatologist would say, well, he's not in a flare. So, and I'd say, well, why is his creatinine 1.8? Which I personally didn't like. And so we did go to a nephrologist, and in part of his workup, and he knew, he was in the same medical clinic that the rheumatologist was, and he knew, he could see his history very well. But he recommended that my husband have a kidney biopsy, which he did have a kidney biopsy. And then it turned out to be that the changes on his kidney biopsy were not vasculitic changes, that the changes were more indicative of high blood pressure. And so he had been having episodes of high blood pressure that we didn't really pick up on. And that was causing more damage to his kidneys than the vasculitis did. And those numbers and his blood pressure and everything evened out much better after he got under better control with an additional blood pressure medicine that the doctor ordered. Now that he has Parkinson's disease, we've had to take him off of all but 1/2 of a blood pressure medicine because he has so many fluctuations in lying, sitting, and standing blood pressure. So just remember that not everything is vasculitis, and some things do need to have further workup done.
What great advice. I do think that we kind of get in a tunnel of
Yeah,
looking at things because
that's right.
the primary for most of us is a form of vasculitis.
Right.
And it's great advice to like bring these things up, be your own best advocate, monitor these things,
Right.
and make sure that your doctors are the ones doing the evaluation, not us.
Exactly. That's right.
So I just want to end up today by saying thank you to you, Jane, for being our medical knowledge today and helping us interpret all these things. I learned so much from you
Well,
today.
thank you.
Just the diastolic systolic thing was a big mystery to me, so I appreciate all that. And
Good.
also we learned today that monitoring and charting is probably one of the most important things we can do to be our own best advocate for those of us with vasculitis. And I just want to say that I got to download a home health journal from the Vasculitis Foundation website not too long ago, and was thinking to myself, had I had this a long time ago, I wouldn't have developed all my little charts that I had on sticky notes everywhere. So I just want to advise everybody to go to the Vasculitis Foundation website, because there is a home health journal that has pretty much every chart you could ever think of in the journal. And it's all kept in one place, and it's easily transportable in a binder to your doctor's office. So if that's something that you do well with, charting on paper as opposed to charting digitally, then I would strongly recommend that you check for that on the Vasculitis Foundation website.
All right.
And special thanks today to ChemoCentrix, Genentech, and Amgen as our sponsors of patient education for the Vasculitis Foundation.